So greetings, everybody. We're going to get started here in the interest of time. My name is Michael Alvarez, Director of the School of Medicine Career Center, and welcome to our Industry Insights program series. We have with us today two representatives from the AAAS Policy Fellowship Program. Coincidentally, had performed their fellowships within the EPA, but of course it's available to people with a diverse set of scientific backgrounds and training and medical backgrounds. So we're going to hear in general about the fellowships and where they take place, that sort of thing. Ellen will take care of that. And then we will move to more Q&A, and we encourage you to dialogue a little bit towards the latter half of the program so that you get your questions answered. And with that, I will hand things over to our first guest and presenter. Ellen Natesan has worked at the Natural Resource Facility here in San Francisco for the water. What's the title?
The agency is the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay.
But it's basically the water department.
Okay, great. So with that, we'll ask you to come over and introduce the program and get things started.
Okay, thanks.
Put that in your pocket.
Do I have a pocket? Yes, I do. Okay. Hello? Does that work? Can you hear? Probably could hear without the microphone. Okay. Just out of curiosity, who is in medical field? And biological science is not medical? And other stuff? Engineering, that sort of thing? Who has already applied to AAAS this year or in previous years? Okay, and so everybody else is just sort of thinking about maybe a future year. Okay, great. So AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's a nonprofit organization that has a lot of different activities promoting science in policy and in the public. And one of their big things that they're very famous for is their Science magazine. It's a very prestigious magazine of scientific articles. And then one of their big programs is the Science Policy Fellowship that we're going to talk about today, which John and I did, which is a lot of fun and very interesting. It started off in 1973 with only 7 fellows that were placed on Capitol Hill to advise congressional members on scientific issues. And it grew a lot. Now, this year was, I can't remember the number, but we'll get to it in a minute, but about 160 people, so it's grown tremendously. One of the biggest areas that has been created is for fellows to be in the executive branch, so different federal agencies, and there's a wide selection of federal agencies where you could be placed, and then they still have the congressional placements as well. So the objective is to place a scientist with a Ph.D. and some scientific experience. You have people, more recent Ph.D.s, and then people all the way at the end of their careers placed in Capitol Hill and in these agencies. The objective is to bring scientific thinking, scientific knowledge to policymakers, and also allow you to bring back some of the language and culture and information needs of policymakers back to scientists so they can understand better how they can design their experiments or data gathering exercises so they generate information that's actually relevant to current issues that are being addressed in Congress as well as at the local scale. Once you sort of get the idea at the federal level, it translates pretty readily to state and local levels as well. As I said already, the fellowship has grown dramatically, particularly in the executive branch, and there's a whole bunch of different agencies you could do a fellowship in. The congressional fellows, there's still only 2 AAAS-sponsored congressional fellows, and the remainder are sponsored by these different partner scientific societies. So you would apply to those separately. So you don't apply to AAAS. They have their own deadlines, their own timelines. So you need to find whichever your personal scientific society is, and if they have a congressional fellowship program, you need to apply to that separately. Of the 116 first-year fellows in last year, 46 of There's 116 that were first year and 46 second year. Congressional fellowships are non-renewable, and the executive branch you can usually choose to do a second year, which is nice because it gives you a little more time to get oriented. Last year there was more females than males. This year I was told that in the applicant pool and the accepted pool there was more 50-50 ratio. But they don't know, I don't know that they've been tracking these statistics for very long, so there may be typically about equal ratios, and then for some reason more males drop out. I don't know. But they are definitely looking into why that is. They take people from all over, except for you can't be already a federal employee, because the idea is to bring you into the, give you job experience that you don't already have. So they bring people in from academics, from industry, from nonprofits. A lot of people coming from academics, from out of postdocs, and even professors will take a sabbatical and do a AAAS fellowship. They're really encouraging a broad range of disciplines, but there are a lot of biological and medical people. And then their age range is very dramatically large, but there's a good chunk of people that are sort of postdoc. That's the majority, but there's people from all different ages. And there's the whole breakdown of the age structure of this class, which I think is probably pretty typical. That feels like about what my group was like. There's a lot of biologists. You can imagine why that might be. Probably has something to do with salaries in engineering maybe being a little higher, and so it's harder to attract people in from engineering. But they really want people from all different disciplines, and so not that they don't want biologists, but so you have to have a Ph.D. or some sort of professional equivalent. Engineers can do it with a master's and 3 years of experience. And feel free to ask me questions if you have any, if I'm forgetting something that you have a question. They're looking for somebody with a good scientific background. If you're freshly out of a PhD, they want you to have a very good, solid sense of where you're going in your career. Sometimes it's harder to articulate your whole career trajectory when you're just finishing your PhD. So you want to think about that and be sure you know you want to go into policy and explain why you want to do the fellowship. You also have to be a citizen. This is because of security clearance issues. You don't always wind up getting a security clearance, but they never know if you're going to need one or not ahead of time. So just to save the headache, they make sure that you have citizenship. And you also need references. Be sure if you get references, they're good references. Arm the people that are referring you with good information so they're able to write you a nice letter. Make sure that they are going to write you a good letter. Those are important. And all this stuff is on the website too. You can check out more of the details. Okay, so different places you could be a fellow. One is on the Hill. That is probably the broadest in scope. So no matter what your specialty is, if you're placed in a congressional office, you're going to work on whatever the hot issue of the day is. You wind up jumping around and working on what your office is most concerned with. You don't stay in your own specialty. It seems sort of true that the State Department and other international diplomacy fellows are also doing that a little bit. They tend to shift out of what their expertise is and work on the issue of the day. So you get a very broad picture, and it's a lot of fun. And you tend to work with people who are not scientists. In contrast, at the Environmental Protection Agency, where John and I were placed, you're surrounded by scientists, and so it's a very different experience. And instead of it's more possible to bring in, to stay in your area of expertise if that's important to you. And your role is a little bit different. Instead of bringing scientific knowledge to people who have very little scientific training, you're a lot of times more of a go-between, and a lot of times you're bringing policy information to scientists. What explaining to the scientists sort of what they need to be doing to be more relevant to policy. But there's a whole bunch of other, but I'm guessing they're all sort of similar in this category. There's a lot of scientists at all of these. You know, obviously, National Science Foundation, you're going to be surrounded by top-notch scientists. So your role will be a little different than in a congressional fellowship. And here's some more. Similarly, you know, similar sorts of situation. National Institute of Health, you're going to be surrounded by excellent scientists. So your role is going to be much more in the policy end of things. Rather than bringing science, you're going to be bringing policy into your office. And then there's the defense fellowship. So there's these different categories you can apply to, and you can choose what fits best for you, or you can apply to more than one. I think you can apply to up to two. I'm not sure. But I think you can apply to more than one if you think that you might fit more than one category. And all this is on the website. There's a bunch of details about when you have to have applied for and when you do the interviews, et cetera, et cetera. We can talk about what the interview process is like if anybody has any questions about that. You start with an orientation. When I did the orientation, it was almost over a month. And now I think it's down to just a week. It was a little bit too long, I think, when I did it. So it's probably good they condensed it. How long was it when you did it? 2 weeks. You had 2 weeks. Okay, so they're cutting it down. Yeah, it was almost a month. It was a lot of just amazing talks and amazing lunches, a lot of really good food and networking, and you get to know all the other fellows, and it's a just great fun time. And then now they have a lot more through the year things, which they had less of when I was there. So they have career workshops where you work on negotiating salaries or different topics. A lot of opportunities, and you have speakers that come. Invited speakers you can have, and then they have informal things like happy hours or family picnics or that sort of thing. There's a lot of opportunities to really get to know the people in the fellowship program, which is a huge advantage when you go to start looking for a job afterwards or just throughout your career. I know a number of people I can always call and ask difficult questions of that I know are going to have the answer. And that's a huge resource for me, just knowing all these people in this network. Plus, there's just a camaraderie within the AAAS fellowship program. So even people who are former fellows are always helpful. It's a great network to become a part of. So that's one of the biggest advantages, aside from the fact that the whole process is fun and you learn about policy. The network you join is really fabulous. And you get a science magazine for a year afterwards, although you have to pay for it in advance, right? So it's kind of... anyways, the stipend is, for most people, $68,000. If you have a lot of working experience beforehand, it can be higher. And you get up to $4,000 relocation. And in DC, which is a lot cheaper than living here in Palo Alto, that's a pretty decent salary. You can live on that. It's not at all like living here. And you can get health insurance reimbursed. You get to travel a lot if you want to. You don't. Well, if you're in the State Department, you have to travel a lot. You might wind up in Iraq, but in other fellowship programs, it's usually more up to you. If you want to go to scientific society meetings, if you want to travel a lot, you can. I did a good bit of traveling farther into my fellowship. In the beginning, I had a little kid who was getting older, and as she got older, then I was more willing to do more traveling. And so later on in the fellowship, I did some international traveling. It was a lot of fun. It says $4,000, but I spent a lot more than that, and probably a lot of people spend a lot less. So it sort of works out. These numbers are a little bit skewed, I think, because the Remain in Public Policy group includes the people who stay in the fellowship a second year. So I think I'm not sure what it really would break down to, but certainly of the people I know and of my experience, staying in some sort of policy role is certainly a popular option. And a lot of people stay right in the office that they were placed in. And then other people find other positions in other places. Let's see. Oh, here's the website. Is that the last slide? Nope. Yeah. Okay. So there's the website. And then, yeah, I think John and I are going to talk about our personal experience of the whole process and all that. So, and answer any questions that we can.
I have a quick question about
Okay.
the travel allowance.
Uh-huh.
You said you spent a lot more than $4,000, so
Yeah.
is that beyond the $4,000 you used your own money? Or?
Oh, no. Yeah, no, it was all paid for. It was just, in my case, there was more money in the pot, maybe left over from a previous year that people hadn't spent. And, or maybe the EPA had more money. I'm not sure, but I didn't have any trouble.
Your office can add more money to your travel budget.
Oh, that must be what happened.
So they give you $4,000, and then you can discuss with your
Supervisor.
mentor or your supervisor.
Okay.
If you need to travel more, and then if the funds are there, then they can make that happen.
Right. Yeah, no, I didn't have to travel on my own money at all. I don't think I would have. I like traveling, but not you know. I went to Malaysia. That was a fun outing. Here, why don't you come over here?
So should I take a couple minutes to?
Sure. You want to give your background and?
Yeah, if I'll describe my personal experience, and it may be helpful as a way to kind of draw out some of the things that Ellen was just talking about. So I'll just kind of briefly go through my trajectory from graduate school to where I am today at the Moore Foundation in San Francisco. And
Oh, sorry.
thank you.
I can hear him fine. All right. Here. Well, you sound like you're not allowed to say, so I'll go sit down.
I'll try to be brief. Okay. So the type of science that always got me excited was at the interface of biology and geology. So from college and into graduate school, I was always looking at that interface. So I went to the University of Washington and got a Ph.D. in oceanography, and I finished that in 2003. And I remember pretty clearly on my grad school application that I wanted to pursue an academic teaching and research career, and certainly options outside of that were not in my mental scape at all at that time. So I studied deep sea hydrothermal vents in graduate school, went out, spent about 7 months at sea, went down to the seafloor in Alvin, and I really liked grad school, so I spent 8 years there, and luckily my advisor let me stay for that long. But of course, all good things must come to an end, so I went on to a postdoc at UMass in Western Massachusetts in the microbiology department. And one of the things that was exciting about that was that it was more applied work. It was projects about bioremediation and microbial fuel cells. And I guess the tie-in here is that I was feeling an ever-increasing need to do something more applied, something more immediate return. So basic research is obviously really important for all sorts of medical, biological, environmental issues, but going into the policy side of things was a way, I thought, to have more immediate returns. And there were some other issues, I would say. Like, I was tired of microbes kind of controlling my life, having to come in and do time points like late at night, early in the morning. I was like, okay, I think I'm ready for a change from that. I don't really remember when I heard about the AAAS program, but like I was just saying, it seemed like a great opportunity to do policy work, but I must say that my notions about EPA and the federal government were a little bit naive, first off. I thought, for example, that the EPA had a greater focus on what I consider to be the environment, and that means like frogs and lizards and things like that, but it's much more human health focused, and environment can mean like the inside of a building, for example. So I was like, oh, didn't really think of that as the environment. And unfortunately, there was actually not an opportunity to go into an ecologically oriented or marine science section at EPA. So I ended up at a Homeland Security office, which is something I had no clue about. It may be surprising to you guys as well that EPA has a Homeland Security function, but it has to do with cleanup. If there's any sort of biological agent release, chemical weapons, et cetera, EPA are the folks who need to know how to actually deal with bringing whatever place back to workable or usable conditions. And so this certainly felt like a gamble. Like, all my friends made fun of me. They're like, round peg, square hole. Like, didn't quite see the match between me and Homeland Security at EPA. But I took the gamble because my mentor to be, he was really smart. He was kind of like a mover and a shaker, as they would say. And it was also a chance to really see how the government worked. So I was involved with interagency committees, so that means between EPA and the Department of Agriculture and DHS, for example, and just working on problems which were really at the interface between these different departments. And there were also certain White House committees that were looking at various aspects of various Homeland Security issues for obvious reasons. I ended up spending my 2 years, so I renewed, and spent 2 years working on agriculture-related Homeland Securities at EPA. And so at the time, avian influenza was the big buzz, so that kind of got caught up in that whirlwind. There were other, fun issues like foot and mouth disease, and also mass carcass disposal, which is something I'd really never thought very much about. But I went to a lot of dead animal meetings, and I did actually, I remember suggesting at this one meeting in Texas in the lunch line, I said, well, maybe vegetarianism is a solution to this whole carcass disposal problem, but no one really laughed. So, but let me take, so there's some fun stories, I guess, but one of the important things that I learned was that working in government, and this is applicable to my current situation too, is that you really got to be able to learn on the fly. And you also have to be comfortable making decisions with more shallow knowledge than you're used to as a bench scientist. Like, you don't have time to, do an experiment, to write a chapter, to be the ultimate expert on a given issue. Yet you have to make a decision. And so that was really kind of interesting to see. I was lucky later on in my fellowship to actually use some oceanography experience, because people were proposing of dumping dead animals in the ocean. And so I said, well, this is probably like a bad idea for these, various ecological reasons, not to mention pathogen transmission, back through environmental vectors. But it was actually a good lesson too, because while my personal tendencies would be, like, how could you think of something so ridiculous? I had to be a scientist and say, okay, well, what are all the, there's no disposal method that is a zero environmental impact method. So you got to weigh the pros and cons, you got to look at all that. So that was kind of actually a helpful thing to kind of put my knee-jerk reaction in check, and helpful also as a perspective on how the government works and how it really takes in all stakeholder positions into account. And let's see, I wrote a quick list of some skills that I learned at EPA. So in addition to what I just mentioned about learning on the fly and making decisions with what felt to me like incomplete knowledge, you also have to work with non-scientists who don't really use the scientific method, or are not conversant in facts and hypotheses, and they're using that in their decision making. And also there was a good degree of outcomes-based work. So there are specific goals, you got to get to those goals, but also how are you going to measure your progress towards those goals? So in science, that's not often, or not necessarily, like how you think. Sure, you want to get like the experiment done, but how do you measure scientific progress? Like that's a tough thing. And then there were also, things I learned about the importance of getting all stakeholders to buy into whatever you're proposing, and to building consensus around that. So my time at AAAS was limited to 2 years, and then I moved to San Francisco in September, so just a couple months ago, to take a job at the Moore Foundation in the city. And that's, you may not be familiar with it. Well, I'll tell you some numbers in a second, but it's a philanthropic granting organization that was founded in about 2001 by the Moore family, and that's the Intel folks. And so most of the money that they disperse goes to environmental conservation groups, but they also have a science section, which is where I fit in. And within that science section, they have a marine microbiology program. So it was a perfect alignment of my background as a scientist, as an oceanography PhD, plus the skills that I learned in the real world at EPA, with some of those skills that I just mentioned about measuring progress, outcomes, and all those kind of business terms, I guess, that I make fun of my friends for, and now they make fun of me for. So my job title is a program officer, so I just want to really briefly tell you about that, because it's a pretty bizarre job title. Sounds like police officer or something like that. But unlike NSF, the Moore Foundation is more of a hands-on granting organization. And so that means the awards that they give are more so grant contract hybrids. So the Moore Foundation will give a university money, and it's like, well, this money comes with some strings, and here are the strings. And so the program officer job is working with scientists, working with the grantees to achieve the grant objectives. But it means a lot of proactive project management, going to meetings, talking with these folks, and making sure that that progress is being made. And I looked up, I think there's about $8 million in grants going to Stanford right now, but mostly to Hopkins Marine Station. SLAC just got a large grant, and also Stanford Hospital and Clinics, so I don't know what that grant is about. There's a nursing program at the Moore Foundation, so certainly it's related to that. And I drew up another list at Mike's suggestion for here's some unsolicited advice. I don't mean this to be some sort of like strange pep talk, but if you're looking for something to do outside of academics, there are things that you can be thinking about now and doing now which might help prepare you. And these are, these are probably pretty self-evident, but like getting involved in a wide array of activities, and maybe taking a leadership role in one of those things. Figure out what gets you up in the morning, and try to pursue something related to that. Ask people about their jobs, what they do, what they like, what they don't like. Cultivate mentors, and that may or may not be your lab's PI. Feel free to set up informational interviews with organizations around the Bay Area. Everything is here. Just go talk to people. And also network, and I don't mean that in some cloying sense, but it's an opportunity for low-key engagement with people, just to learn about what's going on. So I guess I'll end with that. I'm happy, we can take questions now, but there you go.
So maybe I should give a quick overview of my background. Oh, right. Hello. Okay, so very quickly, I'll try and make it brief, but I just wanted to give you a little background of what my background was. So I started off, got my undergraduate degree in math. Then I decided I wanted to do wild and fisheries science, so I went and got a Ph.D. in wildlife fisheries science. Then I decided I liked evolution, so I went and did a postdoc in population genetics. But then while I was doing that, I realized I really wanted to do conservation biology. And then I realized really what I wanted to do was a lot of different things, and I did enjoy the depth that you get out of learning a scientific topic in great detail, but not as much as I like learning about different things. Whoops. So that was part of what motivated me to want to do a AAAS fellowship, was that I really enjoy a wide variety of topics, and I like looking at the big picture and thinking at the level and scope that you do when you're thinking about policy, as opposed to the incredible intimacy you have with a single topic when you're in most scientific studies. So that was one of the big things that drew me to the policy world. And when I decided I wanted to do policy, then I started calling people and asking them how they'd gotten into policy and what the best way to do it was. And pretty much everybody said the only way to do it is to do a AAAS fellowship. So I thought, uh-oh. So fortunately, I was able to do a AAAS fellowship. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure there are other pathways in, but this is just a really easy one. And one of the nice things also I was going to mention about the networking is once you have a job, it's much easier to network, because people really want to talk to you, because you just really honestly just want to talk to them. Whereas if you're looking for a job, people are a little suspicious. It's harder to talk to people. Not that you shouldn't go out and talk to people, but another thing about the AAAS fellowship is it puts you in a position to talk to all sorts of people. And one of the ideas at the EPA for sure, but I think this is true of all agencies, wherever you get placed, you wind up interacting with people at a much higher management level than you would normally interact with. So you represent your agency at a pretty high level. So the people you're interacting with and networking with are all very high level people, as opposed to what, if you were just placed in these agencies as a scientist, you wouldn't have that opportunity. So it's a great opportunity. So anyways, I did the fellowship. I decided I loved working in the policy world. So then I took some time off, a long maternity leave, and then I came back to work. And I work now for the San Francisco Water Department, for the city and county of San Francisco, and do ecosystem management. And I work much like in the fellowship. I get to work on a wide variety of questions and look at ecological concerns, and I bridge the divide between the scientists and the policymakers, and that for me is a lot of fun and one of the great consequences. So I think my fellowship really created my career, and it was a great thing to have done. So are we ready for questions? Okay. Whichever. Go.
We can whichever.
What?
Am I whichever?
Yeah.
Sure. Can you clarify what this means when you guys say, or not you, but this handout says that all requirements for the terminal degree must have been completed by the application deadline? Does it mean that by December the 5th you have to have the degree in your hands, your Ph.D. or whatever? Or does it mean that you have to have your thesis submitted? So what does it actually mean?
I think it means that.
You want to pass the mic in?
Okay. Here.
The mic is for the video.
Oh, so you maybe want to repeat the question for the video.
Okay. So the question was, what does completing all degree requirements mean exactly? And I would hazard a guess that it's if the university is going to is signing off or has signed off on you getting that degree, that's sufficient. Whether there's, yeah. Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, I'm not sure when you actually have to have, but I think that's a question we're not going to be able to answer.
I can answer that because I just applied
Okay.
in December, and you have to have your thesis submitted, and then you would have to submit a letter from the registrar saying that everything is finished.
Okay, I'll try and repeat that. Okay, so your thesis has to be submitted, and you have to have a letter from the registrar that you're done. Okay. Next question.
I was wondering if you could talk about the interview process a little bit. If you were selected for 2 programs and you end up getting offers for both, like how much information you get about the types of things you've been working on beforehand.
Okay. Should I start? Okay. The interview process, the main part, the first part is the panel interview. And if you apply to more than one, you can go through that process twice. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it can be kind of a hostile panel interview, so you should be prepared, and not just to answer technical scientific questions, but really answer sort of career questions. Where are you going to be in 5 years, and that sort of question. And if you get selected, I actually had my choice of 2 fellowship programs, and so I did, when I went back for the placement process, I went through all the agencies on one list and all the agencies on the other list, and then made my choice. So you just have a wider range of placement options, that's all, if you have more than one fellowship. Do you want to answer that question?
I also applied to and was accepted into 2 fellowship programs, but I didn't have any hostile interview panels, fortunately. But it was kind of intense. It was 7 or 8 interviewers and you, and just rounds of questions. But it was no technical questions. For me, it was broad broad, like Ellen just said, career type questions, or what do you think the role of scientists in government is, just big picture types of questions. There was also an assignment that you had to prepare in advance, a one-page memo, and so there were questions about the memo. And the memo, that test was, can you convey scientific information to a policy crowd, to a non-science crowd? Can you pull out the salient information? Put the punchline up top, for example. Don't bury it at the bottom because people are busy and don't have time necessarily to even read a whole page. And then for the placement process, so once you're accepted, once you make it past that interview, there's a week during which you run around DC like crazy, and all the doors are open. You go from office to office to office, and you try to find a match. So you don't know where you're going to end up. I ended up in Homeland Security, so that was not anticipated.
Right. Yeah, I take back the hostile. Intense is a better word. Okay.
For the interview process, I have a couple questions. One, aside from writing the brief, how did you guys prepare for that? Prepare for the questions? Is it just something you need to think through philosophically in your mind, like what your goals are, or
right?
How did you prepare for that? And the second, if you make it past the interview process after the semifinalists, you become a finalist, and that means you have the fellowship, right? Or does that mean you may not even get it if you can't find a placement?
Okay, so the two questions are, what was the first question? Sorry.
Preparation.
Oh, prepare, how to prepare. And the second question is, if you get through the first round of interviews, might you not find a placement? So I'll answer the second one first. It's possible you might not find a placement, but I think it's sort of rare.
Very rare.
It's very rare that you don't find a placement, but you have to be a little bit flexible. You can't just say, I've got to do this office, I must, you have to be willing to do something different. And then you'll get a placement, almost for sure. How do you prepare? I would suggest you think about some of these broader questions, and two main questions you need to be able to answer and articulate well. What is the fellowship going to do for you, and what are you going to do for them when you're there? So how can you, what is the benefits of choosing you and not somebody else to these agencies or to the congressional office? And then how is that going to change your career path and get you where you need to go or where you want to go? Okay.
I'll only add that in preparation, I recall just trying to be really up on current events. Reading the policy section in Science Magazine, for example, just convey that you have a broader picture sense of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, good advice.
I have a question, or a couple of questions. What would you all say makes an excellent candidate for this fellowship position? And would you say taking classes in policy while you're a grad student, would that kind of put you up there? Or maybe getting a master's in public policy? And also, if you're coming from research or biomedical research background, would you say doing a postdoc in research before applying for this, would that also make you a better candidate?
Okay. Should I start again? Okay, so what would make you a better candidate? Do you need classes in policy or a postdoc? They definitely do seem to like somebody who's a little bit more of a seasoned scientist, but it's not necessary. You can apply directly, and you can apply more than once. If you don't get it, you can try again. And for taking policy classes, I'm sure it wouldn't hurt, but it's definitely not required. But you can be up on current events and but I would think having a degree in policy certainly would show that you're interested in that, or taking a class. But I don't think it's necessary, because that's the whole point, is to train you on that sort of thing. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of the background that my friends had in the program, and I think some of them did have specific policy experience, a policy degree or a policy job beforehand, but that was the minority, I would say. What seemed most important was just to convey in words and hopefully backed up with some sort of evidence that you were doing things outside of just your lab work. And that could be at multiple scales. Maybe you've volunteered for something which shows your commitment to greater societal, good, for example, but not necessarily policy related.
Why don't you take it?
I have one more, sorry. So you guys both found jobs kind of within what you were doing before. Obviously, you didn't go back to a postdoc position, and you didn't stay in DC to continue on in policy. So, and I think you kind of touched on this before, but how much, did you find your jobs through networking while you were a fellow, while you were fellows? And then also, how far did having this AAAS fellowship on your CV go in getting your job that you have now?
For me, and my boss told me this. She said it was crucial that I had not necessarily the AAAS program experience, but something outside of academics for getting my current job. And it was for a couple reasons. One, it showed a commitment to. There was a low risk that I would be someone who would go back into academics. Like I had kind of made the shift and was committed to it. And that wasn't necessarily, though, just to make a quick comment, that going into the fellowship program does not mean you can't go back to academics, as Ellen said, a lot of people do. And the job, I think a friend just kind of randomly forwarded me the job ad. It just kind of came up out of nowhere. But at the same time, there was a former fellow who was working at the Moore Foundation, turns out to be a mutual friend. And I gave her a call. I said, what's the scoop? What do I need to know?
So I found out about my current job through a connection of a connection of a connection of a person I worked with at the EPA. So I probably would have found out about the job anyways, but I think that was another way to find out about jobs. And I do think that having the fellowship experience was definitely key to getting the job, but it might, similarly, it didn't necessarily have to be the AAAS fellowship. It was just experience outside of academics that was, and policy experience that was important. So, but the fellowship is a great way to get that experience. So.
Were you cultivating your current jobs while you were fellows?
Well, okay, so were we cultivating the current jobs while we were fellows? I wasn't, because I took a few years off afterwards. So for me, it was a little bit harder to get back on the on-ramp because I took some time off to be a mom. But how about you?
I guess I never, I kind of kept my hands in the oceanography world the whole time, and in terms of, staying up to date with my friends, finding out what they're doing, my oceanography friends and colleagues, and keeping on top of the primary scientific literature as much as I could. It was kind of a mountainous task, to be dealing with, multiple very different disciplines. But so I wasn't specifically cultivating what I'm doing now, but I was kind of I tried to keep the door open to it.
Does the AAAS fellowship at the end provide some sort of a job placement opportunity? I would guess there's a lot of companies and nonprofits and so on that may be interested in hiring these fellows. And so is there some kind of a job fair or something of that sort at the very end that brings together potential companies and so on and you guys? Yeah,
more like 6 months before the end, but that's when they start trying to open up the career doors. So that kind of happened in two ways. I recall there was a specific event where they had former fellows come in and talk about a wide variety of job paths to pursue after the fellowship. And so that was an opportunity to network directly with those people. But in addition, there were so many mixers and food and free alcohol events that just provided opportunity to meet all the former fellows, or as many who were in DC who would come to these events. So a mix of structured and unstructured help for finding a career, but nothing quite as robust as a job fair, I would say.
Well, yeah, I think they're moving more in that direction. There's more career support stuff than, so there's more targeted stuff. But yeah, there was no shortage of informal opportunities to find jobs.
How many people apply?
Well, I think one of those slides had that information on there. How many people apply was a question. I think it's variable, but I think it's maybe roughly twice as many people as get placed, roughly?
I'm not sure.
Just made that up, so I actually don't know. Sorry. I think it's on their website, though. Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about mentoring. Are you assigned a specific mentor when you start the program, or you just kind of latch on to someone or a few people when you get there?
I think it's sort of a mix. I kind of latched on to somebody, but you definitely assigned a placement within an office, and sometimes there's a person in charge of a particular project that they want you to start in on, and that's what you agree to when you decide to go to that office. And so in that case, you would be assigned that particular mentor. But sometimes you can float around within an office.
There's some semantic issues, I think, to address. So when your EPA has a particular arrangement with the fellowship program that due to the current situation is they're very sensitive to the fellows not being employees. So instead of calling your supervisor your boss, your supervisor, or your boss, you call that person your mentor. So it is synonymous with supervisor in this sense. But like Ellen just said, you have to have a specific office, a specific contact as a mentor / supervisor when you go in. But again, that doesn't stop you from, talking with other people in the agency or working between offices and having multiple advisors.
Right. I guess I'd like to add to that, at least in my office, and I think that AAAS pretty much insists on this, that whatever office you're in, you don't have to work on the stuff that's pertinent directly just to that office. You can work on stuff throughout the agency, you can work on interagency stuff, you can float around and work on a wide variety of projects. You don't have to just serve that office and just do what your mentor is, primarily wants results for. So it's good to do that because you are able to engage with the people who are in the cubes around you, but you also have the opportunity to expand way beyond that and get involved with all sorts of projects that have nothing to do with your home office. So,
So in terms of recommendations, who would you recommend that we get letters of recommendation from, or somebody said we need 3 recommendations? First of all, who did you get?
Yeah, it's just.
Who else might be good?
Yeah, I had. So the question was about whom to ask for recommendations. I had my grad advisor, a committee member, and another scientist. I don't remember who exactly right now. So it was just scientists, and they were familiar with the program, and I certainly educated them about AAAS and said, here's what it is, here's what I'm trying to achieve. Hopefully your letter will align with what I'm trying to convey in my application. And I shared my application essay with them too, saying okay, here's what I wrote, make it sound even better.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also in a situation where, and I think it really helps if you have a good working relationship with your Ph.D. supervisor and postdoc supervisor. That makes it a lot easier because those are sort of obvious people to pick. And sharing your essay and just basically writing the letter for them, nothing wrong with that. You just say, this is really what I'm hoping to achieve. This is why I think I'm a good fit for this. You help them a lot. I think that's almost more important than, but I don't know if it would look suspicious if you didn't choose your PhD supervisor as one of the 3. I didn't have to worry about that, fortunately.
I think they're well used to having folks with just scientists as referees. I don't think there's an expectation that you'll have the mayor of your city or something talk about your policy experience. So I think it's par for the course to have scientists as referees only.
Right. Okay.
So let me just add a couple of comments here before we wrap up. Thank you both for an excellent presentation. I would like to invite all of you to spend a few minutes here out in the lobby because there are some refreshments and we can speak more informally and have our more personal questions about the program answered and speak with one another about this opportunity. But before we break, I just want to say thanks for coming. I want to say that as far as the questions about mentorship and how to approach somebody to become a mentor is very interesting here. I think the fact that people by default regard their PIs or their faculty advisor as their mentor is kind of interesting in different settings, where consulting and business settings where I've worked. It really is a matter of managing your own career and identifying people who seem to be doing the sorts of things that you would like to be doing and finding a way to engage with them and feature to them the sorts of work that you are doing and making a case for your interest in what it is that that they might have going on and why is it that you are relevant. The same sorts of skill, it's the same type of skill that would be important in making your way into one of these fellowship types of opportunities, being able to look at your scientific background, not try and play that as the only string that you have to play, but describe yourself with more pluripotent or multiple kind of capabilities and featuring those. So there's a lot of things I think that are important as far as managing your career, rationalizing why you want to go in one particular direction or another, that are useful for the fellowship application process, and once you're inside of it, useful for navigating and hooking up with the sorts of people through these informal networking opportunities and through whatever formal channels they might be developing to make your way into the direction you'd like to go. So just wanted to make that comment, and again say thanks to our guests, and with that I'd invite you to thank them as well, and we'll see you out front.